onto. That means it is surjective. Every element in S star which will be some subset of S is the image of some element in S under sigma. Keep in mind that S star has elements which are subsets of S by definition. Okay. Now we are going to consider a special element in S star. Now let T be the set of all elements in S such that S does not belong to S sigma. Does it make sense? What have we written here? You see, we are considering the set of those elements in S, small s, such that S does not belong to S sigma. What is this statement? What is S sigma? See, if you are taking S from S, then S sigma is an element in S star, and S star is the power set of S. So that means S sigma is actually a subset of capital S. Now this subset may or may not contain the element small s, because we don't know what this mapping is, right? We only have supposed its existence. It may be anything. There is no further property of sigma of which we know, that we know of. So it may or may not happen that for a given S belongs to S sigma. If S does not belong to S sigma, then we consider it in the set T. But if the element S belongs to S sigma, then that element will not be considered in T. So this is a legitimate subset of S, and as such it is an element in S star, the power set of S. Note that T is a subset of S, and hence T belongs to S star. Okay. Now we use our supposition that this mapping is actually onto. Because it is onto, this element T will be the image of some element in S under sigma. Since sigma is onto, we have T equal to T sigma for some element T belonging to S. This is coming from the ontoness of sigma. Okay. Now we ask a question. Which of these two statements is true? Clearly one of them has to be true and the other has to be false, according to the laws of set theory, because T sigma is a legitimate set in S star. That means it's a subset of S, and T is an element of S, so we can it makes sense to ask whether T belongs to this subset or not. So let us now investigate this situation. we may as well write like this also to make this solution more interesting. We now ask whether T belongs to T sigma or T does not belong to T sigma. First, assume that T belongs to T sigma. Okay. Suppose T belongs to T sigma. Now note this carefully. T is an element of S and T belongs to T sigma. So that means this condition is not true for T, and that's why the element T, according to the definition of capital T, cannot belong to capital T. So by the definition of T, we have T not belonging to capital T because it does not satisfy this condition. But now here comes the strange thing. But note that because T belongs to T sigma and T sigma is capital T, so at the same time T also belongs to capital T. When it is not in capital T, it is in capital T. Clearly this cannot happen. So this is a contradiction. A statement and its negation both are true. That cannot happen in any consistent theory. So this is a contradiction. So that means our assumption here is wrong. So T cannot belong to T sigma. Or let us suppose. Actually, I write suppose when I am expecting a contradiction, and I write assume when I am taking a hypothesis. I don't know why I use the words like this, but I always do that. If you observe carefully, you will see it. So our supposition that T belongs to T sigma is wrong. That is, we must have T not belonging to T sigma. Okay, so the previous arguments now force us to conclude this, but now T is satisfying the condition needed for it to be in capital T. Then again, by the definition of capital T, T belongs to capital T because it is an element in S which does not belong to T sigma, so it has to belong to capital T according to this description of capital T. But also Note this condition. T does not belong to T sigma, but T sigma is T. So again we are having that same problem. T is in T, but at the same time it is not in T. This is again a contradiction. But now we have run out of options. Either T belongs to T sigma or T does not belong to T sigma, and both of them, I mean whatever I am supposing is giving me nonsense. So why is this happening? This is happening because in the very beginning of the solution we have supposed something, namely the existence of an onto map from S to S star. So that supposition is wrong. This shows that our first supposition is wrong. That is, there cannot be any function that maps S onto S star. You can think, okay, and this concludes the solution. You can think of the situation like this. You see, when you have only one element in S, say this, then what is S star? S star has all the subsets of S. So one subset is this, another subset is S itself. So this has one element, this has two elements. So you can never find an onto mapping from this to this because this is bigger. If S has, in fact you can prove, or I think we have proved or we have not proved, I can't remember. If S has n elements, then S star has 2 to the power n elements. I think I proved this in Tau's analysis, if I am remembering correctly. And 2 to the power n is always greater than n. So if S is finite, S star is also finite, but it's always larger than S. Even when S is infinite, in the sense of not being able to find an onto function, S star is larger, and this is actually the question of S star having larger cardinality than S. So even when S is infinite, S star is more infinite than S, just like this. If you have the set of natural numbers, then its power set has larger cardinality than the natural numbers, and one can prove that there is a one-to-one correspondence between this and the set of real numbers. So real numbers are more infinite than natural numbers, which in a sense you can understand. Naturals are discrete, reals are continuous. But if you take the power set of real numbers, cardinality of that will be even greater. So in this way you can see that if you keep taking power sets, you will get larger and larger infinities. So there is not just one infinity, but this is the smallest infinity, And in fact, there is a famous statement which is known as the continuum hypothesis, which says that there is no infinity which lies strictly between the countable infinity and the linear continuum. I think I have said many things which probably are going over your head. Maybe many of you, if you are not already familiar with these things. So let me stop my rambling and concentrate on what I am doing. So next we come to exercise 7. If the set S has n elements, prove that A of S has n factorial elements. So if a set has n elements, then the set of all one-to-one onto mappings from S to itself has n factorial elements. So it is the number of elements of this set that we are saying it's very important. So we now have to prove this statement, and naturally, since this statement is about natural numbers, so we will use induction. But instead of proving this statement itself, we will prove a slightly stronger statement. So here is the solution. So the solution goes like, but first of all I have to mention that we are proving something stronger. We prove a slightly stronger statement namely, if S and T are two sets having n elements each, then there are n factorial. I am not sure if I should call it stronger because I have taken a more general situation where I don't have mappings from S to itself, but mappings from S to possibly a different set T. Whether it is stronger or not in the actual sense of the word, it does not matter. Also, I can't remember why I am proving it this way, because I did it long time ago. Maybe we will realize why we are doing it this way in the course of proving this. So there are n factorial one-to-one correspondences. For this, we apply induction on N. We apply induction on N keep in mind that our n, the smallest value of n now will be 1, because we are not considering functions where the first set can be the empty set. We are considering, or we have defined the concept of mapping only between non-empty sets. So when n is equal to 1, there is precisely one function from S to T, and that function is a one-to-one correspondence. Why? You see, when n is 1, that means since n is the number of elements in S as well as T, so if n is 1, S has only one element, T also has only one element, which may or may not be the same as the one in S. So if I define a function from such an S to T, then the function is exactly this. There is no other option. The only element in S has to be mapped onto the only element in T. And this function is clearly both one-to-one and onto. So that means it's a one-to-one correspondence. That's what we have written there. There is precisely one function from S to T, and that function is a one-to-one correspondence. But what is the conclusion now? Hence, the result is true in this case. Why? Because now n is 1 and the number of functions we have found is also 1, and 1 factorial is 1. You treat this one, the one on the right hand side, as the number of functions from S to T that are one-to-one correspondences, and on the left hand side you have factorial of the number of elements in S as well as T. Okay, so in this case our statement is true. Now we assume the induction hypothesis. Now assume that the result is true for n, where n is some positive integer. Positive and not non-negative, because our beginning is from 1. That is, if S and T are any two sets having n elements each, then there exist n factorial one-to-one correspondences from S to T. That is our assumption, and it is the induction hypothesis. Now we will carry out the induction step, which is that from this we have to prove that the same statement, similar statement is true when you have sets having n plus 1 elements each. Now let u comma v be sets having n plus 1 elements each. Okay, let us now choose two elements, I mean one element in each set arbitrarily. Let u belong to u and v belong to v. We have chosen two elements. Then these subsets obtained by removing those chosen elements u minus u and v minus v are sets having n elements each, because we are considering sets having n plus 1 elements, and from each one of them we have removed one element, so we are left with n elements in each of them, having n elements each. So now on these two sets we can apply our induction hypothesis. So by the induction hypothesis, the number of 1-to-1 correspondences which look like this, from u minus u to v minus v, is n factorial. That is coming from this assumption. Where have we assumed it? Here. Now assume that the result is true for n. Okay. Each such mapping f can be extended. I will say what extended actually means. Extended to a mapping f star from u to v, which is also a 1-to-1 correspondence. Such that f star u minus u comma v minus v. Okay, I cannot write this, no? Okay, I have to write it somewhat differently. So that means I made a small mistake in notations in the actual solution. I will rectify it later. So here I do it correctly, which is also a 1-to-1 correspondence, such that Okay, let us just write exactly what f star is. S f star is equal to SF if S belongs to U minus U, and UF star is equal to V. Okay, let us now try to make sense of what we have written here. What have we achieved so far? Till this everything was okay, because these sets each had n elements, or each has n elements. So the number of one-to-one correspondences from this set to this set is n factorial. Then each such one-to-one correspondence, each such mapping f can be extended to a mapping from U to V. Why we say extended? It's because this mapping is on a smaller set which is not defined on this small u. Now if we additionally define it on u, then we get a new mapping, of course, and that new mapping is f star, and that is said to be an extension of f, because part of f star is f itself, and that is shown by this equation. Effect of f star on an element of u minus u is the same as its effect, the effect of f on s. So the part of f star on this subset u minus u is f, and other than that on u the effect is v. So we have this is extra, so this extends the map f to f star, a larger map defined on a larger set. This is the subset u minus u, this is the superset u. Okay, and we are saying that this f star is also a one-to-one correspondence. Actually it's not that obvious. F is a one-to-one correspondence means f is one-to-one and onto. Now we are claiming that f star is also both one-to-one and onto. How? I think it's not that obvious. So let us remove this part, which is a one-to-one correspondence, and just simply write to a mapping f star such that this, we have to now show that it's a one-to-one correspondence. Okay, this we will do. We now claim that f star is a one-to-one correspondence. Let us first show that f star is onto, it's easier. Okay, let B belonging to V be any element. We have to show that B is the image of some element in U under f star. Okay, now two cases arise. If B is equal to V, being an element in V, B can be V also. It may or may not be V, but one case is that it is V. Then B is equal to V is equal to UF star, where u belongs to u. So if B is V, then B is the F star image of U. Okay. If B is not equal to V, then B belongs to V minus V, because it is in V and it's not small v, so it is in V minus V. Okay. Since f from u minus u to v minus v is onto, because f is a one-to-one correspondence that is given, so B will be the image of some element in u minus u under the function f. Is onto, we have B is equal to AF for some A belonging to u minus u. But note that S belongs to u minus u. Note that whenever we have an element in u minus u, then its F star image is nothing but its F image. So now we have an element in u minus u, so its F image will be its F star image, but then B is equal to AF equal to A F star, where